People assume silence means weakness. They think if you're quiet, you're harmless. If you're old, you're finished. At 71 years old, I learned how dangerous that assumption can be for the people who make it. My name is Margaret Caldwell, but almost nobody calls me that anymore. To most people, I'm just Maggie. Old Maggie. Sweet Maggie. The widow who walks a little slower than she used to and still carries cash because cards feel unreliable. The woman neighbors wave at politely and forget about 5 seconds later. The kind of woman people talk around instead of to. What they don't realize is that being ignored gives you space. Space to listen. Space to notice. Space to wait. And waiting has always been my strongest skill. 3 weeks before my world split open, I stood ankle-deep in wet grass at Oakwood Memorial Cemetery, staring at a hole in the ground that was about to swallow my only child. The sky hung low and gray, like it was pressing down on everyone standing there. November does that. It strips the color out of everything. Trees go bare, air goes sharp. Grief feels heavier. My son, Daniel Caldwell, lay inside a polished wooden casket that cost more than my first car. 46 years old. Too young. Always too young when it's your child. I'd carried him for 9 months, raised him alone after his father died on a construction site when Daniel was 12, watched him grow into a man who worked with his hands and believed in paying people fairly and showing up when you said you would. Strong man, healthy man. Not the kind whose heart just quits for no reason. The doctor said massive cardiac failure like it was an item on a checklist. No history. No warning signs. Just bad luck. I didn't believe him. Mothers know things long before facts catch up. People lined up to offer condolences. Old neighbors, clients from Daniel's business, men with calloused hands and women with tired eyes. Everyone had a story. Everyone had tears. Some cried openly. Some stared at the ground. Some clutched tissues so tight they tore. Standing beside me, dressed in a sleek black coat and heels that sank into the grass, was Lena Caldwell, Daniel's wife. She looked flawless. Hair done, makeup perfect. The kind of grief that photographs well. She held my arm lightly, like a performance. Every few minutes, she checked her phone. Just a quick glance. A flick of the wrist, like she was counting down to something. I noticed everything. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn to read people the way others read headlines. You see what they don't bother hiding. You hear what they don't say. Lena wasn't mourning. She was waiting. The preacher said kind words. Safe words, heaven, peace, rest. None of it landed. All I could think about was Daniel at 6 years old, dragging mud through my kitchen. Daniel at 16, sulking because I grounded him for skipping school. Daniel at 30, calling me because he didn't know how to cook anything except eggs. Now there was dirt hitting wood, and that was supposed to be the end of it. When the service ended, Lena insisted on driving us back. She always insisted on things. Took over decisions quietly, confidently, like it was second nature. She'd been doing it for years, slowly pushing herself into the center of Daniel's life while convincing him it was all teamwork. We drove to my house. The house I bought with my husband in the early 80s. The house with creaky stairs and uneven door frames and memories baked into every wall. The house I refinanced twice to keep afloat after my husband died. The house I added Daniel to legally years ago, not because I needed to, but because it felt right. The driveway looked the same. Maple tree bare. Porch light flickering like it always had. But something felt wrong the moment Lena unlocked the door, like she belonged there. Neighbors filled the living room. Dishes stacked on every surface. People told stories about Daniel, how he fixed leaks for elderly clients without charging them. How he coached youth baseball even though he hated paperwork. How he worked himself half to death building his business from nothing. I sat in my chair and listened. Lena moved through the room, accepting sympathy like tips. By sunset, everyone left. The house grew quiet. Too quiet. Silence pressed against my ears until it felt loud. That's when Lena stopped pretending. She stood in front of me, arms crossed, posture straight, expression flat. The grief vanished from her face like it had never existed. She told me I needed to leave. 2 weeks. That was the timeline she gave me. 2 weeks to pack up my belongings and find somewhere else to go. She said Daniel had taken care of everything before he passed. Said the house was legally hers now. Said she planned to sell it and move forward. She tossed paperwork onto the table like it was trash. I picked it up with shaking hands. A deed transfer. Her name. Daniel's signature. Wrong signature. Anyone who really knew my son would have seen it instantly. Daniel's handwriting was clean and confident. This looked slow, careful, fake. I told her Daniel wouldn't have done this without telling me. She smiled. That smile wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was confident. She leaned closer and reminded me of my age. Told me courts didn't care about feelings. Told me she'd already spoken to a lawyer. Told me if I didn't leave peacefully, she'd have me removed. Trespassing. In my own home. Something inside me hardened. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something deliberate. I nodded. That threw her off. She expected tears, pleading. A breakdown. Instead, I stood, slowly, and said I understood. I went to my bedroom and packed a suitcase, the old one. The one I used for short trips. I moved carefully. Let her watch. Let her believe she'd won. When I walked out the door, she laughed. Said something about shelters and how the world didn't owe me anything. She was right. The world doesn't owe you justice. You have to force it to look at you. That night, I stayed in a cheap motel on the edge of town. Clean enough. Quiet enough. I sat on the bed, staring at the wall, until the clock hit 9. Then I made the call. Ruth Delaney answered on the second ring. Ruth had been my attorney for over 20 years. She helped me after my husband's death, after Daniel was born, after every major legal decision I'd ever made. She knew my life better than most people knew their own. I told her everything. She listened. When I finished, she told me to sleep. Then she said, she underestimated you. The next morning, while Lena probably sipped coffee in my kitchen and planned paint colors, Ruth was opening files that hadn't been touched in years. Trust documents. Asset protections. Legal structures designed for worst-case scenarios. You see, the house didn't technically belong to me. It belonged to a family trust. A trust Daniel knew about. A trust he couldn't override. A trust Lena never bothered to ask about because she assumed I was just an old woman clinging to memories. By noon, Ruth had already contacted authorities. By evening, Lena's sense of victory was cracking. And this moment right here was only the beginning. Because once you realize someone tried to erase you, you stop playing nice. And once you start digging for truth, you don't just uncover lies. You uncover crimes. People think the worst moment of betrayal is when it happens. It's not. The worst moment is when you realize how long it's been happening right under your nose. The morning after I left my house, I woke up before sunrise in that motel room with the curtains half drawn and the heater rattling like it was struggling to stay alive. For a second, I forgot where I was. That half second where your brain reaches for comfort and comes back empty. Then it all rushed in at once. Daniel, the grave, Lena's voice telling me to disappear, the sound of my own front door closing behind me. I sat up slowly, bones stiff, hands trembling just enough to notice. Not fear, not weakness. Adrenaline has a different texture when you're old. It doesn't explode. It settles in, heavy, focused. I made coffee using the cheap motel machine. Burnt, bitter, perfect. At exactly 8:30, my phone rang. Ruth. She didn't waste time on greetings. She never did when something mattered. She told me the deed Lena waved around was legally meaningless. Told me the house had been protected for decades under the Caldwell family trust. Told me Daniel had never owned it outright and therefore could never sign it over Evan, if that signature had been real, which it wasn't. I closed my eyes when she said that. Relief came first. Sharp and fast. My son hadn't betrayed me. He hadn't sold me out behind my back. Then anger followed, because that meant Lena hadn't just pushed me out. She'd tried to steal. Ruth said something else that morning that stuck with me. She didn't just plan this fast. She said, "This was calculated." That word rolled around in my head for the rest of the day. Calculated. Lena wasn't impulsive. She wasn't reckless. She didn't just wake up grieving and decide to throw an old woman onto the street. This had been building. Step by step, quietly, and quiet people notice quiet things. While Ruth filed paperwork and contacted the county, I did something Lena never thought I would. I drove past my house slowly around noon, didn't stop, didn't pull in, just passed by like a stranger. Lena's car was in the driveway. The curtains in the living room were open. Boxers stacked near the door. She was already packing my life away. That's when something inside me shifted. I stopped thinking like a victim. I started thinking like a witness. That afternoon, Ruth called again. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. She told me she'd contacted the sheriff's department. Not to make accusations, just to notify them that there was an unlawful occupancy issue involving a protected trust asset. That phrase alone was enough to trigger procedure. By the time Lena finished her lunch, 2 deputies were knocking on my door. I wasn't there to see it, but I didn't need to be. I could picture it perfectly. Lena opening the door with that practiced smile. The one she used when she wanted to look reasonable. The one she used when she thought she was in control. The deputies asking questions. .com/neutral. Not accusing her of anything, just informing her that the house was part of an active legal trust dispute and that she was not permitted to sell, modify, or remove assets until ownership was formally resolved. That smile would have tightened. People like Lena hate uncertainty. They thrive on momentum. Slow them down, and they start making mistakes. By evening, Ruth had another update. The deed Lena presented. A forensic specialist took one look and flagged it. Pressure inconsistencies. Ink flow problems. Signature traced, not written. Forgery. That word landed heavier than I expected. Not because it surprised me, because it confirmed something worse. If Lena was willing to forge legal documents, what else was she willing to fake? That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was scared, but because memories kept rearranging themselves. Little moments that didn't matter before suddenly snapped into focus. Lena insisting on handling finances. Lena discouraging Daniel from visiting me alone. Lena making jokes about how old-fashioned I was when I asked questions. She didn't isolate Daniel loudly. She did it gently. And gentle manipulation is the most dangerous kind. The next morning, Ruth introduced me to a man named Elliot Marks, former federal investigator. Private now. The kind of man who spoke softly and listened harder than anyone I'd ever met. Late 50s, sharp eyes. Wore plain clothes like he didn't want to be remembered. He didn't ask me how I felt. He asked me about Lena. Where she came from, how she met Daniel, what she did for work. I realized I didn't have many answers. And that scared me, because how does someone marry into your family and remain a mystery for 7 years? Elliot started with finances. That's always where lies leave fingerprints. Within days, he found cracks. Lena wasn't just bad with money. She was bleeding it. Credit cards maxed out. Cash advances. Accounts Daniel never knew existed. Online betting platforms registered under variations of her name. Debts shuffled around like a shell game. She wasn't just irresponsible. She was desperate. Then Elliot found something worse. A meeting. 3 weeks before Daniel died. A bar on the edge of town. Security footage showed Lena sitting across from a man Elliot recognized instantly. A lender. Not a bank, not a friend. The kind of guy who doesn't send reminders. The kind who expects payment on time or collects interest in other ways. That's when the timeline started lining up too cleanly. Lena's debts escalating. The forged deed dated weeks before Daniel's death. Her sudden confidence about owning my house. She needed money. Fast, and Daniel had become an obstacle. The words felt poisonous in my mouth, even thinking them. Elliot didn't accuse. He didn't speculate. He just kept digging. Then came the call that made my knees buckle. Daniel had met with a divorce attorney 3 weeks before he died. I sat down hard when Ruth told me that. Divorce meant Daniel knew. It meant he'd found the lies. It meant he was planning to leave. And people like Lena don't lose quietly. That night, alone in the motel room, I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not loud, not dramatic. Just tears sliding down an old woman's face as reality finally caught up. My son hadn't died suddenly. He'd been in danger. And I had been standing right there the whole time, thinking patience meant staying still. But patience doesn't mean inaction. It means waiting for the right moment to strike. And Lena was running out of moments. There's a strange quiet that follows justice. People don't talk about it much. They think once the verdict comes down, once the cuffs close, once the truth finally gets dragged into the light, everything settles. Like dust after a storm. That's a lie. The truth doesn't settle. It lingers, it hangs in corners. It shows up in empty chairs and unanswered phone calls. It waits for you in the middle of the night when your body wakes up before your mind remembers what happened. After Lena was arrested. After the charges were read. After the word murder stopped being whispered and started being printed. The world expected me to feel relieved. I didn't. I felt hollow. Not broken. Not defeated. Hollow. Like something important had been removed and the space it left behind didn't know what to become yet. I moved back into my house quietly. No announcement. No celebration. Just me unlocking the door with a hand that shook a little less than before. The house smelled the same. Old wood. Lemon cleaner. Time. Lena hadn't finished packing. Some of her things were still there, shoved into closets like she planned to come back for them. She never did. I walked room to room slowly, touching walls, furniture, picture frames. In the hallway, Daniel's childhood height marks were still etched into the doorframe. Pencil lines, dates, memories that survived everything. I sat at the kitchen table that first night and cried into my hands. Not because I missed Lena. Because I missed my son. Justice doesn't bring people back. It just stops lies from pretending to be truth. The trial took months. I attended only when I had to. The details were brutal in their simplicity. Financial records. Toxicology reports. Text messages Lena thought were deleted. A plan that relied entirely on the assumption that no one would look too closely at an old woman grieving quietly in the background. She was wrong. When the guilty verdict came in, the courtroom buzzed like it needed noise to process what had happened. Reporters rushed out. Lawyers packed up files. People whispered. I stayed seated. Elliot sat beside me, silent as always. Ruth squeezed my hand once. That was all any of us needed. Lena was sentenced to life. No parole. No appeals worth mentioning. When they led her away, she finally looked at me. Really looked. Her eyes weren't angry. They weren't even afraid. They were empty. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something loosen inside my chest. Not forgiveness. Release. After that, the world tried to move me on. Neighbors suggested I sell the house. Start fresh. Downsize. Enjoy what time you have left, they said. Like survival was a waiting room instead of a choice. They didn't understand. This house wasn't something to escape. It was something to finish properly. Daniel's business shut down within months. No one wanted to take it over. The tools were donated. The trucks sold. I kept one thing, a worn notebook Daniel used to jot down ideas. Half sketches, half reminders. Things he wanted to build someday when life slowed down. Life never slowed down for him. But it could for someone else. That's when the idea came. Not all at once. Ideas never do. They creep in, sit quietly, wait for permission. I didn't want to build something big. I wanted to build something useful. With Ruth's help, I repurposed the old warehouse Daniel once talked about buying. Nothing fancy. Clean floors, workbenches, storage, space, a place where young people could learn trades, plumbing, electrical, carpentry, skills that don't disappear when trends change. I named it after Daniel, not as a monument, as a continuation. People showed up, kids who didn't fit in classrooms, men starting over, women tired of being told they didn't belong in workshops, people with rough hands and honest intentions. Watching them learn felt like watching something heal. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, when the light hits the windows just right, I sit on a bench near the entrance and listen. The sound of tools, laughter, focus. It sounds like life moving forward. And sometimes, someone asks me how I did it. How I survived losing my son. Losing trust. Losing years I can't get back. I tell them the truth. One didn't survive by being loud. I survived by paying attention. People underestimate quiet women because they think silence means submission. They think age means weakness. They think grief makes you soft. They're wrong. Silence is where you see clearly. Age is where you gain patience. Grief is where you find purpose. Lena thought she erased me. Instead, she exposed herself. And Daniel didn't get the ending he deserved, but his story didn't end where she thought it would. It ended where truth lives. In the hands of people who build instead of destroy. And that's enough. For now, grief doesn't leave when justice shows up. That's something people don't warn you about. They think courtrooms are erasers. They think verdicts clean things up. They don't. They just change the shape of the pain. Give it edges instead of fog. After the trial, after the cameras packed up and the reporters found a new story to chase, my life got quieter than it had ever been, not empty, just still. The kind of still that forces you to hear your own thoughts whether you want to or not. I woke up every morning at the same time. Daniel used to call me on his way to work. For years, he'd check in, even if it was just a quick morning, "Mom," before hanging up. Muscle memory is cruel like that. My body expected his voice long after the world had decided it was done with him. I learned to sit with that silence instead of fighting it. The house helped. Old houses know how to hold pain without collapsing. The floors creaked the same way they always had. The kitchen windows still caught the afternoon sun just right. I kept most things the way they were. Not because I was stuck, but because memories don't need to be buried to move forward. The trade center kept me busy. Busier than I'd been in years. Paperwork, schedules, donors, city inspections. I didn't mind any of it. It gave my days structure again. Purpose that wasn't just survival. Sometimes people recognized me. They'd approach carefully, like grief might be contagious. Say they were sorry. Say they admired my strength. Say they couldn't imagine going through what I had. I always smiled politely. Because strength isn't what carried me through. Clarity did. At night though, when the world shut up, clarity turned heavy. Questions crept in. Not about Lena. I stopped wondering about her the day the cell door closed. But about myself. What I missed, what I ignored. Whether I could have seen it sooner. That kind of guilt doesn't ask permission. It just shows up and sits beside you. One night, I pulled out Daniel's old notebook again. Flipped through pages I'd read 100 times already. Sketches of projects. Lists of materials. Half-finished ideas. On the last page, written sideways like he ran out of room, was a sentence I'd never noticed before. Don't let fear make decisions for you. I stared at it for a long time. Daniel didn't write things like that casually. He wasn't poetic. He was practical. If he wrote it down, it meant something. Maybe he'd been writing to himself. Maybe, in a strange way, he'd been writing to me. That thought stayed with me when the letters started coming. Some were kind, some were curious, some were angry. A few blamed me, said I should have protected him better. Said I should have intervened sooner. Said I raised him wrong if he married someone like Lena. I read every one. Didn't respond. You don't owe strangers access to your healing. The hardest letter came from someone unexpected. Lena's sister. She didn't defend her. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just said she was sorry. Said she suspected things were wrong for years but didn't know how bad it was. Said she hoped I was finding peace. I folded that letter carefully and put it away. It reminded me of something important. Evil doesn't announce itself. It blends in. It wears normal faces. It laughs at the same jokes. It waits for opportunity. An opportunity usually comes wrapped in trust. One afternoon, long after the trial dust settled, Elliot stopped by the trade center. He watched quietly from the doorway while students worked. No clipboard, no questions, just observation. When he finally spoke, he said something that stuck. "You know why she failed?" I shrugged. "She rushed the end," he said. "People like her always do. They think the final move is the only one that matters." I knew exactly what he meant. Lena thought pushing me out of the house was the finish line. She didn't realize it was the moment she stepped into the spotlight. Patience beats panic every time. As the seasons changed, the house started feeling less like a museum and more like a home again. I planted new flowers out front. Repainted the porch. Small things, intentional things. Moving forward doesn't mean erasing the past. It means building around it. Sometimes, when I sat on the porch in the evening, neighbors would stop and chat. They didn't talk about the trial anymore. They talked about weather. About the trade center. About life. That's how I knew the story was finally losing its grip on me. Not forgotten, just no longer in control. Late one night, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Gray hair, lines around my eyes. A woman shaped by loss and endurance. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't see someone fragile. I saw someone forged. There's power in surviving something that tried to erase you. There's power in outliving the lies told about you. And there's power in choosing what comes next instead of letting pain decide for you. I turned off the lights and went to bed. Not because the day defeated me, but because tomorrow was waiting. There's a moment, long after the noise fades, when life asks you a quiet question, not loudly, not urgently, just a soft, persistent whisper. What are you going to do with what's left? For a long time after everything ended, the trial, the headlines, the whispers, I didn't have an answer. I woke up, did what needed doing, went to bed, and repeated it. That's survival. It's not living, but it keeps you upright while the ground underneath finishes shifting. What finally changed things wasn't something dramatic. It was a chair. An empty folding chair at the trade center, sitting crooked near a workbench where Daniel would have stood if life had played fair. Someone had forgotten to put it away after class. I stared at it longer than I should have, and it hit me. This wasn't about what I lost anymore. It was about what I was still responsible for. Grief has a way of convincing you that loving again, loving life, loving purpose is betrayal. Like moving forward means leaving someone behind. That's a lie grief tells when it's scared of becoming smaller. I stopped letting it lie to me. The trade center grew. Slowly, honestly. No big announcements. No flashy branding. Just word of mouth and work that mattered. People came in unsure and left steadier, not fixed. Nobody's ever fixed, but equipped. I watched young men who'd been told they were failures learn how to build something with their hands. I watched women step into workshops they were told warranty meant for them and outwork everyone in the room. I watched people show up early and leave tired in the good way, the way that tells you your effort meant something. That's when I finally understood what Daniel had been trying to do his whole life. He wasn't chasing money. He was chasing usefulness. Lena never understood that. She thought value came from what you took, from what you owned, from what you could squeeze out of people before they noticed. That's why she failed. People like her always think the end is the part that matters, the payoff, the win. They don't realize the end is just exposure. The real power is built quietly, long before anyone's watching. Sometimes people still ask me if I'm angry. I tell them the truth. Anger burns hot and fast. It leaves you empty. I don't live there anymore. What I feel now is heavier, calmer, sharper, understanding. I understand how easily kindness gets mistaken for weakness. How often quiet people get written off. How dangerous it is to underestimate someone just because they don't announce themselves. Lena thought she erased me because I didn't fight loudly. She didn't realize I was fighting smarter. I still visit Daniel's grave. Not as often as before. Not out of obligation. Out of connection. I tell him about the center. About the people. About the things he never got to see. I don't apologize anymore. I think he'd hate that. I think he'd want me standing tall. And I do. There's a freedom that comes when you stop living defensively. When you stop explaining yourself to people who never planned to listen. When you stop shrinking to make others comfortable. At my age, you don't have time for that nonsense. You choose where your energy goes. Mine goes into building. Into protecting what matters. Into making sure that if someone ever tries to erase me again, they'll find something far bigger standing in their way. Because here's the truth, most people learn too late. The quiet ones aren't weak. They're patient, they're observant. And when they finally move, it's already over. Lena saw an old woman with slow steps and tired eyes. She never saw the foundation underneath. She never saw the years of preparation. She never saw the calm that comes from knowing exactly who you are. And by the time she realized it, there was nothing left she could do. Final words, if you're listening to this and you've ever been underestimated, if someone looked at you and decided you were harmless, if they mistook your silence for surrender, remember this: you don't have to rush. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to fight loud. You just have to stay standing long enough for the truth to surface, because it always does. Call to action. See, if this story moved you, subscribe to the channel for more powerful, slow burn stories about patience, justice, and quiet strength. Like the video if you believe that silence can be a weapon and wisdom always outlasts greed. And comment below, tell us where you're watching from, or share a moment when someone underestimated you and regretted it. Because here, every story has one truth: the quiet ones always get the last word.